New sexual assault allegations surface against Trump's pick for Supreme Court Justice. Democrats have tried to impeach the president, and now they're calling for impeaching one of his appointees. But can they actually do it? I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Brett Kavanaugh. New revelations have the Democrats calling for the FBI to reopen an investigation into Kavanaugh, repeating their claims that the first one was botched, and once again the call for impeachment, both throughout Washington's halls of power, but also in the headlines written by those whose job it is to keep that power in check. It wasn't long ago that we saw an angry Kavanaugh defend himself during his confirmation hearing against accuser Christine Blasey Ford's heartfelt testimony. It left many wondering how a man accused of multiple sexual assaults could be appointed to the highest court in the land. Kavanaugh was still confirmed by the Senate, and now President Donald Trump says the Democrats, in collusion with what he calls the lamestream media, are needlessly going after Brett Kavanaugh once again. Haider Abbasi takes a look.
I believed he was going to rape me. I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life.
It was a hearing that inflamed the United States. Last year, Christine Blasey Ford spoke to senators about being sexually assaulted as a teenager. Who did she say attacked her? Brett Kavanaugh. The conservative judge was nominated by President Donald Trump to the U.S. Supreme Court. And his lifetime appointment could change decades of legal rulings. Kavanaugh denied the allegations, and despite Ford's painful testimony, he was confirmed. He won by a vote of 50 to 48, the narrowest margin for a Supreme Court justice in more than a century. But it seems Kavanaugh can't be complacent. The New York Times has details of another allegation of sexual misconduct, this time when Kavanaugh was a student at Yale University, and the response has been fierce. Several members of Congress have demanded Kavanaugh be impeached. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has accused Kavanaugh of lying during his testimony at his confirmation hearings last year. And others have questioned the integrity of the FBI investigation into Ford's allegations. But what are the chances of impeachment? Democrats would need a two-thirds majority vote in the Senate. To pass articles of impeachment in the House, a simple majority is needed. Then a trial would take place in the Senate, and an official is removed only if there's a two-thirds majority vote there. And Republicans control the upper chamber of Congress, so it's unlikely to pass. And the U.S. Supreme Court justice has never been removed from office. Although Ford's testimony was called credible by many lawmakers, both Democrat and Republican, the new allegation doesn't have the same support. The New York Times published a correction to its original article. The woman allegedly involved in the incident didn't speak to the newspaper, and her friends say she doesn't remember the incident. Trump jumped on this.
I think the New York Times made another terrible mistake. It's a shame that a thing like that could happen. I see they're making a big correction today. They've just announced there's a correction. But to do that about a Supreme Court justice is a terrible thing. It's a false accusation.
So could the calls for impeachment backfire on the Democrats? And what impact could this have on next year's election? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
Well, to help answer that, let's ask attorney Qasim Rashid, who joins us from Stafford, Virginia. He's a Democratic candidate for the Virginia State Senate. Standing by in Washington, D.C. is Jason Osborne, a former senior advisor with Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. And also in Washington, John Malcolm, a senior legal fellow and the vice president of the Institute for Constitutional Government at the Heritage Foundation. Good to have you all on the program. Qasim Rashid, you think there's enough in these allegations for possible impeachment of Kavanaugh?
I don't know. I think that's the point of the investigation and why there should have been a thorough investigation from the get-go. I think one of the reasons why the right was working so hard to ram through this nomination without vetting him, without looking at his documents at the White House, without looking at his history, without allowing the FBI to interview or investigate anyone beyond just a couple of days, was because they knew that there's something shady here, there's something inappropriate here. Who paid off his massive debt? Where did it disappear to? These are all questions that you would want to know if you were hiring somebody to run your company. And here we're hiring someone, appointing someone to a lifelong responsibility, one of the most powerful positions in our nation. And it was rammed through so quickly that so many of these questions that we deserve answers to weren't answered. And so to make a speculation now about whether there's enough to impeach him, I simply don't know. But what I do know is that the American people deserve a thorough investigation, and I hope we get that this time.
Jason Osborne, 3 allegations of sexual misconduct. Has it tarnished Trump's pick for the Supreme Court?
I don't think so. I mean, I think we went through this whole escapade last year in the Senate. We've had, for Carson to say that we need to investigate this. Now you've got 2 reporters that have spent 8 months working on this, and all they could come up with was someone's allegation that he heard about this story. I don't think there's any doubt that Christine Blasey Ford, that something happened to her. I just don't believe, based on the facts that were presented, that it was Judge Kavanaugh. I certainly don't believe that Judge Kavanaugh had anything to do with this woman's experience, and I think that the book tells that. I haven't read the book. I've only seen the excerpts, and I've only seen the news reports and the interviews by the book authors, where they clearly said, after correction in the paper, that the woman herself, to her friends, said that she couldn't recount the incident. So I think this is another example of folks that are trying to tarnish Trump. They couldn't win in 2016. They're falling behind in 2020. And I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
Okay. I'll ask Qasim to respond to that in a moment. But I want to ask John Malcolm where he stands on this. Is Kavanaugh being smeared here? Or is there something shady, as Qasim put it, that needs to be looked at?
Oh, no, he's absolutely being smeared. I mean, let's be clear. Brett Kavanaugh had gone through 6 thorough background checks before being nominated to the Supreme Court. There were over 8,500 pages of judicial opinions that he had written or joined to examine. And there were more documents produced from his time in the White House than the previous 5 nominees combined. So to say that they didn't have ample opportunity to examine Brett Kavanaugh's record is preposterous. What this is about is, as Deborah Katz, Christine Blasey Ford's attorney, said, is to try to put an asterisk next to Brett Kavanaugh's name if he issues any opinions in controversial issues, just as they've tried to do with Justice Thomas for the last 30 years. And it's also to send a signal to the next nominee, who may be perhaps replacing Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You'd better be careful, because we will come after you and engage in, if necessary, character assassination. And it's trying to deter people from subjecting themselves to this. It's terrible.
Qasim Rashid, is that what the Democrats are doing?
No, I think there's a couple of things we need to point out here. First, I just want to acknowledge that this is a mantle. There's 4 men talking about this issue of abuse of women. And that's deeply problematic.
That's going to change, actually.
Have an important...
Qasim, that's going to change in a few minutes, actually. We've got Shanon Lee standing by. But
I hope so.
But well noted. Point well noted. I find
that problematic. But to add, it sounds bombastic to say, well, we gave him 8,500 pages of judicial opinions and these background checks. Well, there was over 100,000 pages of his White House records that the president refused to release, over 100,000 pages. And the fact of the matter is, if this was just an attempt by Democrats to be obstructionist, then why didn't they do this with Neil Gorsuch, Justice Gorsuch? They didn't because he had a clean record. And while Democrats may disagree with his conservative stances, they can't tarnish him because of the fact that he had a cleaner record, and they pushed him through. I think it was a near unanimous vote. Here, we have a very different situation. The vast majority of records and information and background checks, his financial records, his work in the White House, we have no idea about. We have no line of sight into. And as far as this idea that he's being tarnished because the Democrats were trying to be lazy and slow, look, Merrick Garland sat for, he's still sitting for his nomination to be heard by the Republicans. It wouldn't even so much as give him a hearing So it's quite hypocritical to, on one hand, wait for well over a year and completely ignore Merrick Garland's nomination, but then get upset when the Democrats, after nominating one Supreme Court justice, want to further vet the second Supreme Court justice when hundreds of thousands of documents that every person has released are now suddenly being held in secrecy. Why so secret? What's the issue here?
Jason Osborne?
I'd laugh when I hear Democrats talk about hypocrisy because, as Carson knows, he lives in the state of Virginia. He's got two credible allegations against the lieutenant governor of the state of Virginia by the women themselves that were sexually harassed or whatever the case may be. He's got a presidential nominee who was the vice president in Joe Biden, who has a credible allegation against him by a woman in Nevada, and they're not calling for either of them to step down or to not run for the presidential nomination. I think what happened here with Gorsuch and Kavanaugh was that the Democrats realized that Gorsuch got through too easily, and they wanted to stake their claim on Kavanaugh and try and build a case moving forward that just doesn't stand up. The finances aspect of it, that's a red herring that Kavanaugh addressed. All of these allegations, Kavanaugh had the opportunity to present his side of the story. You've got cases that go back to when they were in high school and college that no one else can verify. I don't want for a second to think, to Carson's point, that there's four men here talking about it. I completely agree with that and understand that dynamic. And again, I think that something happened to Mrs. Ford, and it's unfortunate, but I don't believe that it was Judge Kavanaugh.
Okay, so Dr. Christine Blasey Ford said that.
Quickly.
Okay, so she said that he attempted to rape her. Would you, Qasim, do you accept that separation of the cases here that Jason's making? He's saying with that one, there seems to be something to look at, but with the others, they don't seem to have as much validity or strength, and the Democrats are putting them all together and trying to get rid of a Trump pick.
Well, first I would tell Jason my name is Qasim, not Carson, so I would appreciate that correction. Second of all, again, I'm not sure what the lieutenant governor here has to do with this case. There's no Democrats defending him. The president has been credibly accused by, I think, 26 women of sexual assault and rape. And you worked on his campaign knowing that, and you continue to support him. So when you talk about hypocrisy, please look in the mirror first before you accuse anyone else. And finally, again, the problem here is that if you had an argument against the Democrats being obstructionist, then you would have seen the Democrats do that with Gorsuch as well. And you would have seen the Democrats do that to maybe spite the way the Republicans completely ignored Merrick Garland, a perfectly viable candidate. But you didn't see Democrats do that. You saw them vet Gorsuch and say, this is a good candidate. We may disagree with his conservative leaning, but he's still a good candidate. We're going to vote for him. To then somehow cherry pick out Kavanaugh, despite the many allegations against him, despite the financial impropriety, despite the 100,000 documents plus kept in secret, I think it's just being dishonest. And then to do all that while hiding behind a president who's been accused by 26 women of sexual assault and rape and try to pretend you have moral standing, it doesn't add up. And I think the American people are seeing that. And that's why you're seeing record numbers of people voting Democrat over Republican, because they want compassion and civility and integrity in their politics, not this double standards and hypocrisy.
Okay, Jason, I'm going to give you a couple minutes to think of your comeback here, but I want to go to John Malcolm and I want to ask something about the New York Times tweet that accompanied the essay. It's now deleted, right? They deleted this tweet, for which they later apologized. But I'm going to read that out to you. It says, having a penis thrust in your face at a drunken dorm party may seem like harmless fun. That was according to the Twitter account. But when Brett Kavanaugh did it to her, Deborah Ramirez says it confirmed that she didn't belong at Yale in the first place. Now, they deleted it. They apologized afterwards. It's an interesting tweet. There are those who defend the president and who defend Kavanaugh who believe that the New York Times almost sort of removed the veil or removed the curtain in terms of their intentions when they put out that tweet. Do you believe that?
Well, I will have to respond to one thing that Qasim said, which is he needs to check again. The Democrats tried to filibuster Neil Gorsuch to get onto the Supreme Court, and very few Democrats, perhaps 3 or 4, crossed over to vote for him.
Can we bring this back?
They did not support him. Sure, look, I don't know, about the New York Times tweet, their intemperate language or what their intentions were. It was, at the very least, extremely shoddy journalism. If there was a story to be told, new news, it was the pressure that was brought on Leland Kaiser, Christine Blasey Ford's friend, to try to get her to change her story to support Dr. Ford. Leland Kaiser is a Democrat, made it quite clear that she did not want Brett Kavanaugh to be confirmed on the Supreme Court, but she said that Dr. Ford's story made no sense, and when she refused to change her story to conform with Dr. Ford's, she was savage. She was accused of being a drug addict who was addled and didn't remember any of this. I mean, this is the kind of hardball tactics that the left is playing here.
Jason, an interesting point that Qasim Rashid made was that you worked for a president who had more than 24 accusations of sexual assault, right? This was all a part of the noise in the build-up to the election and in the aftermath, and there was stuff on record of him talking about grabbing women by so on and so forth, right? With all of this in mind, can't you accept that it's very difficult for Democrats and many others to separate out this approach to looking at Trump's nominees and his own behavior as well? They see it as all part of the same basket.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I apologize about the name of the earbud. It didn't come through clearly. But to address the hypocrisy issue of it, I never called for Biden to step down. I never called for Justin Fairfax to step down. I never defended Donald Trump in any of these allegations. That's not my job, and that wasn't my role on the campaign to do so. Just because I happen to work for someone doesn't disqualify for me to have an opinion on other issues. Just like the folks that worked for Kamala Harris, who had sexual harassment issues in her office, anybody that worked for Joe Biden, who has a credible allegation against him. So let's put that aside. The issues are this. The fact of the matter is that the Democrats and the Republicans can all agree that everybody is innocent until proven guilty. And in a court of law, that's where these issues should be addressed, not in the court of public opinion to try and smear a man who has years of experience in the judicial system, who has clearly fit the role as a Supreme Court justice, who, by the way, has hired more female clerks than any Supreme Court justice has ever done so. If this was a pattern by an individual, it wouldn't have ended in college. It would have continued on.
But Jason, you know that hiring females has nothing to do
supporting him.
Hiring females has nothing to do with whether you have been accused of sexual assault or not, right? I mean, you can make an argument that there's more women to possibly sexually assault. I mean, it doesn't connect at all.
No, but my point is in bringing that up is the fact that this Judge Kavanaugh clearly has a respect for both female and males. He doesn't discriminate. And if he had a pattern of this, it wouldn't be me that works for him. It would be, why would women work for Judge Kavanaugh if this was the type of person that he was? And it's clear that he's not.
Okay, well, John Malcolm.
And they've also gone.
Okay, John Malcolm.
They've also gone further and tried to do everything they could do. Judge Kavanaugh, now Justice Kavanaugh, has not only hired more women clerks than any other federal judge in the history of the federal judiciary. Time after time, they all said how much Judge Kavanaugh was a mentor to them to help them professionally and in terms of their personal life, and expressed love and admiration and undying devotion to Judge and now Justice Kavanaugh.
Okay. John, this is where we thank you and leave you. I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Let's bring into the conversation an advocate for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. Shanon Lee is in Washington, D.C. She's a writer and journalist and also a member of the Rape, Abuse and Incest National Network. Shanon, so we have 3 women at the center of this: Christine Blasey Ford, Deborah Ramirez, and a third unnamed woman who is entangled in this latest New York Times story, which is based on a book. Have their voices been drowned out by the politics that have been going on as a result of this, by all the political implications that have spun off?
I don't know that they've been drowned out. I think that the fact that there are still stories coming out is hopeful. The fact that people are calling this almost like a post-Me Too era is really kind of inaccurate because there are still stories coming out. There are still people that are empowered to basically discuss what happened to them. There's been a lot of talk about this story, about this anonymous victim of late, and whether or not the story is credible because she does not remember it. But that does not mean that it did not happen, especially when there are victims that are coming forward saying, or there are witnesses rather coming forward saying, this is what we saw. They were at a party. There was alcohol involved. She may very well have been in a position where she would not have remembered what happened. It doesn't mean that the story is not invalid. And we certainly are keeping the survivors' names in our mouths. We're talking about Christine Ford. We're talking about the hearing that happened last year. We're talking about the fact that Kavanaugh was kind of fast-tracked through this confirmation process, even though there are a lot of questions surrounding his character. And there are a lot of people that felt like, he definitely could have perjured himself. He did not come across as credible during the hearings.
So what do you want?
We're having this whole argument about whether or not he should be, yes.
Yeah, what do you want out of this? Do you want another FBI investigation?
I definitely think there should be another investigation because his survivors and the victims deserve to have due process. Whether or not that's going to lead to an impeachment, I'm not sure. I don't know what the grounds are for an impeachment. I don't know what we can do at this time. But I do know that there are facts that should come out, and his victims deserve due process.
Jason Osborne?
This is the same argument that we've been talking about now for 20 minutes here. I feel like these women do deserve time to, that something happened to them. Whether or not it was Judge Kavanaugh, I don't think anybody will ever get an answer to that question. So you have two authors that wrote a book that spent the last several months researching that book and still did not come up with anyone that was in the room when that happened with this new allegations. You had third-hand accounts. I don't think that's fair, not only to the victim, but I don't think it's fair to Judge Kavanaugh. In the Christine Blasey Ford case, that was tried in the public. It was tried in the committee. I don't know what else can be brought up that would change the facts that were presented, which is no one at that house, the alleged house, the alleged party, came forward except for Christine Blasey Ford. Even the woman, as John had mentioned earlier, that was supposedly could corroborate the story, was unable to do so and in fact stated so. So I don't know what else can be brought forward that hasn't already been brought forward.
So let me take, so Shanon, when Jason says he sympathizes with the position, but there just isn't enough to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt, your response is what?
Well, that's, his opinion. I believe that there was a hearing and that there were things that were said by Christine Blasey Ford. I don't know if there were things that were actually heard. I don't know if it was heard in any level of seriousness. Certainly she had the time to air out what happened, but I don't know that that it was taken into consideration.
Okay, Qasim Rashid, this is all set against the backdrop of a massive culture war in the United States right now. And the president feeling vindicated, as we heard when the New York Times put out that little correction to the crinkle in their piece. He feels vindicated. He feels it's a witch hunt. It's the lamestream media and so on and so forth. People go a step further and they say, well, if the Democrats want to impeach Kavanaugh or impeach Trump or whatever they want to do in order to hurt Trump and his picks, and if it fails, it only strengthens Trump. And hey, congratulations, you just got Trump reelected in 2020. They have a point, don't they?
I don't buy that argument. It did not hurt the Republicans when they impeached Bill Clinton. In fact, it emboldened them and it helped them win the presidency in 2000. I think this is beyond politics. This is about right and wrong, moral and immoral. My co-panelist here admitted he has no problem working for a man who's been accused of sexual assault and rape over 24 times, a man who publicly admitted to grabbing women by the genitalia and how he does that and how he has a good time doing that. He publicly admitted to enjoying sexually assaulting women, and we have people who enjoy working for him despite that and think that that is okay. So I think for me, this is a much broader question of, as a nation, are we going to allow this atmosphere to persist where people can be elected to power despite having a record of sexual assault. He mentioned that if Justice Kavanaugh had a pattern of this, it wouldn't have stopped in college. Well, who's to say it did? We don't know that. It certainly didn't stop for the president in college. He certainly continues to brag about that for years after his college years. So for me, this is really less about politics and who's going to win, in my election in November of 2019 or the president's attempt for re-election in 2020, and more about something far more important. And that is that as a nation, are we going to recognize that women are equals and we must hear women and believe women and conduct thorough investigations when these accusations come up so men can be held accountable and we don't continue to empower men who commit or enjoy or approve or allow working for those who commit sexual assault.
Shanon Lee, in 20 seconds, please, because we're out of time. Is it a victory that we're having this conversation in the first place?
I don't know if it's a victory. I think that victims and survivors are really interested in justice at this time. We do not want leaders, we don't want lawmakers in office that are sexual predators,
Okay.
and that's the bottom line.
Okay. Shanon, Jason, Qasim, and earlier John, pleasure having you all on the Newsmakers. I thank you very much for joining me. And thank you for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Until next time, bye-bye.